Joe Rogan Podcast, check it out.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
Train by day, Joe Rogan Podcast by night, all day.
All right. Well, first of all, thanks for doing this. I really appreciate it. I found out about you several years back. I had heard something about toxoplasmosis. Am I saying that right?
Yep.
Yeah, and I had seen a speech that you had given on it where you were talking about how many people have been infected by this cat parasite. I've had cats my whole life, and I even had feral cats. And I've always wondered, like, I should probably get tested, and I'm worried about the result.
Perhaps not.
Well, it was just fascinating to me that literally, I mean, what is the number that you estimate in Americans alone that might be infected?
It's on the order of, well, I'm not sure with Americans, but worldwide, it's something like 50% of humans is the best guess.
50% of humans worldwide.
Something on that scale.
For people who've never heard of this, would you mind explaining what this parasite is and how it affects rats and then cats and then people?
Okay, totally bizarre. So it's this protozoan parasite, Toxoplasma gondii, and it's got one of these weird parasitic lifestyles. The only place on Earth where it could reproduce sexually is in the gut of a cat. I don't know why there are people who know this, but so it reproduces there, comes out in the cat feces. Feces are eaten by rodents, and now Toxo's evolutionary challenge is to get that rodent into a cat's stomach. So what Toxo has evolved is this ability. It slowly migrates to the brain of rodents and basically wipes out the innate fear that rodents have of cat smells. Like, you take a lab rat who's been like the descendant of lab rats for like 1,000 years, have never seen a cat, and put like a little puddle of cat pee in its cage, and the rat's going to go on the other side of the cage. Just a hardwired instinctual aversion to cat pheromones, and then put Toxo in a rat, and it loses that aversion. And in fact, in a subset of rats, they like the smell. So out in the natural setting, you now go and approach a cat, and soon the rodents inside the cat's stomach, and Toxo has completed its life cycle.
Well, I had heard that it was so it's a subset of rats that actually are gravitated towards it, because I'd heard it actually rewires them sexually, right?
Yes, that's actually work that we did in my lab, that it basically crosses some of the circuitry in the brain and the hypothalamus so that cat pheromones that used to be activating every alarm circuit in your like limbic system in these rodents now instead sort of taps into sexual arousal pathways. And in male rats, when they smell cat pheromones, they increase testosterone production. So Toxo has just figured out the most brilliant way of doing it. It makes cat pee smell sexy.
Is there any understanding at all of the mechanism of how a parasite can figure out how to rewire an animal's sexual reward system, the fear of the predators? Like, how does that work?
Well, that's something my lab spent a bunch of years on, trying to figure out. I mean, you look at some of these parasites, this taps into this whole world of behavioral manipulation of hosts by parasites, and turns out they've like evolved unbelievably brilliant mechanisms for manipulating hosts for their own benefit. I mean, think about it. You get rabies, you get a rabid dog, and what that's about is a virus that has affected the nervous system of that dog so that it's now rabid and more likely to bite somebody with viral particles in its saliva, which it now passes on to the next individual. Like, you take 10,000 neuroscientists and stick them in a convention on the neurobiology of aggression, and rabies knows more about the neural wiring of aggression than we do.
Wow.
And Toxo knows, quotation marks, something about fear and aversion and the neurobiology of attraction. Part of what it seems to involve is Toxo somewhere along the way has picked up a gene that is pertinent to the dopamine system in mammals. Dopamine is this neurotransmitter. It's about pleasure. There's no protozoan parasite for a billion years that's had any use for this stuff, except it's part of how Toxo seems to be manipulating the reward system in rodents. And then, a couple of years ago, there's a paper showing that in chimpanzees, Toxo makes you less afraid of the smell of leopards.
Wow.
So this appears to be a parasite that just has evolved like this spectacular insight into fear circuitry and attraction circuitry, and it's all for its own benefit to wind up in a cat's gut.
So it's specifically cats. Like, do the chimpanzees still have aversions to snakes and other things that can kill them?
Yep.
Wow.
And at one point, my lab was full of like bobcat pee and wolf pee, and there's actually like a company you could buy urine from. I don't know why anyone would want it except for us, but they sell urine from. Actually, what they use it for is you can go spritz it around your garden to scare the deer away if they're coming in eating your stuff. So I don't know where they get the urine from, but it's like comes certified and all of that. And yeah, it's remarkably specific.
So, like, have they ever done tests where they test like wolf urine or anything like that around chimps? Do they have any aversion to that?
As far as I know, the chimp study has only been with big cat urine, but the rodent studies exactly that, showing it's a fair specificity. The rodents lose a little bit of their general skittishness. They get a little bit disinhibited behaviorally, so just in general, they're out more and more exploratory, more likely to get eaten, but the most selective lasering effect is they're not scared anymore of cat pheromones.
Now, what's fascinating to me is that I've also read that there was a disproportionate amount of successful soccer teams that are in countries with high rates of infestation of toxoplasma.
Okay, that one's new to me, but that sounds like exactly the sort of epidemiological studies that are popping up about humans. Okay, so what about humans? There's two branches of interesting stuff with toxo in humans. One is a literature that's been around for quite some time showing that toxo seems to increase the risk of schizophrenia. There's a higher rate with schizophrenia of individuals who have antibodies against toxo. In other words, sometime in the past, their body was dealing with it, who had cats growing up, whose mother had cats during pregnancy, and like anybody who gets pregnant knows, you immediately get all anxious about cat litter boxes because of the possibility of toxoplasmosis. It can attack the fetal nervous system, do all sorts of damage, and a subtle version of it seems to be a sleeper effect of increasing the risk of schizophrenia. The other realm is toxo-infected humans get subtle changes in personality, neuropsychology, sort of neuropsychological profiles. They get a little bit disinhibited. If you're toxo-infected, you're more likely to die in a car accident involving reckless speeding. If you're toxo-infected and clinically depressed, for the same severity of depression, you're more likely to impulsively kill yourself. In other words, toxo is doing something kind of similar. If you're a rat, one of the hardest wired, scary things in the universe out there is the smell of a cat. If you're a human, it's hurtling through space really fast, jumping out of windows, and toxo seems to blunt a lot of those effects there.
In this, the speech that I saw you give, you were talking about your time working in a hospital, and that there was a disproportionate amount of motorcycle victims.
This was actually something I heard from a clinician, an old sort of parasitology infectious disease doctor who sort of, when I was first telling him about this sort of emerging toxo story, he had like one of these bolts of memory saying, my God, I remember back when I was a resident, there was this old doctor saying, you know, if you're ever harvesting organs from an accident victim, I don't know why, but if it's from somebody who was in a motorcycle accident, make sure you check to see if they have toxoplasmosis. I don't know why, but there's a high rate of that you find in organs from people who were killed driving motorcycles recklessly. Totally anecdotal, N=1 kind of thing, but nonetheless, this was a guy who like studies infectious disease and toxoplasmosis and had not heard about sort of the behavioral findings before, and then out of the recesses of his memory. So what initially seemed like, okay, this is a parasite that's very selectively developed this life cycle between cat stomachs